Imagine this. You go to sleep thinking you're prepared, you're diversified, you're doing the responsible thing, and then you wake up to a headline that changes the definition of ownership overnight. Not the price, not the tax rate, the definition. Suddenly, the thing you thought was private property is treated like a national resource. And you don't get to vote on it. You just get to deal with it. Because here's the uncomfortable reality. Most people don't want to say out loud. When a government decides something is strategic, that word can quietly become a lever that can move markets, rewrite rules, and put ordinary savers on the wrong side of a policy shift they never saw coming. It is Saturday, January 24th, 2026, and the exact time in New York is 9:50 p.m. Comment what time you're watching this, because timing matters more than most people realize. And real quick, I'm running a campaign to eliminate copycat channels. If you value what we do here, hit subscribe and comment. Arjan AG. Now, in this video, we're going to break down why silver just got pushed into a category that changes how politicians and agencies talk about it. Why the history everyone remembers is only part of the story. And what the playbook usually looks like before the public realizes. The game has already started, and I'm going to challenge one of the most popular assumptions along the way. Because the easiest fear to sell is the fear that sounds like history repeating perfectly. Also, check the description, because I've dropped bonus links there, including a premium WhatsApp channel link and a channel membership join link. Keep that in your pocket for later, because the last part of this video is where things get practical. So let's jump in with the one sentence. That should make you sit up straight. Silver being labeled strategic isn't about your coin collection. It's about supply chains, military readiness, power systems, and the kind of industrial bottlenecks that can turn into political emergencies fast. And if you think, okay, that's big picture stuff, it doesn't touch me, then you're exactly the person these stories hit hardest. Because rule changes don't start by targeting you. They start by targeting the word priority. And when priority shows up, control is usually not far behind. Now, before anybody clips a 5-second segment and pretends I'm predicting a raid tomorrow morning, breathe. I'm not here to panic you. I'm here to make sure you're not surprised. There's a difference. Surprise is expensive. Awareness is cheap. Let's talk about the ghost everyone brings up first. 1933. Most people know the basic outline. Crisis, banking, chaos, a signature, and suddenly gold ownership for regular Americans was boxed in by law. And what makes that story so powerful isn't just the policy itself. It's how fast it happened, how normal it felt once it was announced, and how many people complied because the government didn't need to kick doors to get most of what it wanted. That's the lesson, not the drama, the mechanism. When a system is stressed, authorities reach for whatever can stabilize their position. Sometimes that's interest rates, sometimes that's propaganda, sometimes it's capital controls, and sometimes it's a legal reclassification that turns a personal asset into a public necessity. And here's where people get the story wrong in a way that matters today. They assume the next move, if it ever happens, would look exactly like the last move. Same speeches, same executive order vibe, same straightforward Turnitin framing. I'm skeptical of that. If a modern government wanted more metal flow into official channels, there are cleaner tools now. Tools that don't create the same backlash and don't require the same obvious confrontation. And that's why the word strategic is so important, because it opens the door to softer forms of control that still change your outcome. Let me explain. When an asset becomes strategic, it can become subject to priority allocation. That's a fancy way of saying industry gets first dibs. Defense contractors get first dibs. Critical infrastructure gets first dibs. And if that gets formalized during a disruption, the government doesn't have to confiscate your silver to affect your silver. It can choke liquidity, regulate dealers, require reporting thresholds, restrict exports, and create a two-tier market where the approved channel trades one way and the unapproved channel trades another way. Same destination, different road. Now, why is silver even in this conversation in the first place? Because silver isn't just a shiny metal, it's one of the most electrically conductive materials used at scale. It shows up in high reliability connectors in certain medical applications, in electronics, in specialized coatings, and most importantly for policymakers right now, it shows up in the clean energy industrial push that governments have tied their reputations to. Solar manufacturing is a perfect example. You can argue about politics all day, but the physical reality doesn't care. Solar panels require conductive pastes and connections, and silver has been a key ingredient in those systems for a long time. Manufacturers keep working to thrift it down and substitute where possible. But the demand is still real, and when you combine that with grid upgrades, data centers, electrification, and defense procurement, you get a metal that quietly moves from commodity to constraint, and constraints create policy. Here's the next piece most people miss. Strategic declarations tend to appear before the public feels the shortage. Governments don't wait for a warehouse to be empty. They move when they see the risk curve bending the wrong way. They move when they see concentrated supply, geopolitical friction, and rising dependency. So when you hear strategic, don't picture a label. Picture a warning light on a dashboard. Now, let's talk about the supply side, because this is where the emotional argument turns into a math problem. Silver production is not like printing money. You can't snap your fingers and double output by next quarter. A lot of silver comes as a byproduct of other mining operations. That means even if silver prices surge, output doesn't instantly surge in response. The pipeline is slow. Permitting is slow. Development is slow. And for years, the market has leaned on inventories and recycling to fill gaps. That's a fragile arrangement because inventories are finite. Recycling depends on economics, and industrial users don't like uncertainty. If manufacturers think supply will be tight later, they secure contracts earlier. And that can create the very squeeze everyone says can't happen. And this is why strategic matters. It signals that policymakers have noticed the fragility too. But let's not pretend this is a one-country story. Silver is global. Mining jurisdictions are global. Refining capacity is global. And when global politics gets messy, metals become bargaining chips. Not because they're shiny, but because they're useful. Now, before we go further, I need you to picture how modern policy actually spreads. It rarely starts with a dramatic announcement. It starts with a technical memo, then an agency update, then a compliance notice, then an industry roundtable, then a temporary measure. And then one day, you realize the temporary measure has been renewed 3 times, and everyone acts like it's normal. That's the real cliffhanger. Not will they do it, but will you notice the steps before the door closes? So, if we're talking about silver and potential government control, we need to separate 3 very different scenarios. Scenario 1, outright confiscation. Classic, blunt, politically explosive. It makes headlines, it creates backlash. It requires a strong justification. Scenario 2, forced mobilization of flows, meaning industry is prioritized, certain sales channels are restricted, and compliance burdens make private trading harder. This can happen quietly and can be framed as stabilization. Scenario 3, financial pressure. Taxes, reporting requirements, transaction limits, and incentives that push metal back into official channels without ever calling it. Confiscation, most people only talk about scenario 1. The real world often leans on scenarios 2 and 3, and that brings us back to history. Because the history lesson isn't, they did it once, so they'll do it again. The history lesson is in crisis. The rule book becomes flexible. Now, let's address the line that's been making the rounds. Silver has been declared a strategic mineral, so your silver could be seized. Could it? Legally, governments often have broad emergency powers. Practically, it depends on political costs, enforcement feasibility, and what the government actually needs. Here's the counterpoint you won't hear enough. Seizing small private holdings is inefficient. If the goal is to feed industrial demand, the biggest levers are upstream: mining output, refining, industrial contracts, and large-scale inventories held by institutions. That's where the volume is. That's where the policy pressure goes first. So if you're picturing agents tracking down a handful of coins, that's not the likely starting point. The likely starting point is control of commercial pipelines. But, big but, individuals can still get caught in the net if the rules are written broadly. And that's what you need to understand. Even if you're not the target, you can be affected. For example, imagine a temporary requirement that major dealers must report certain purchases and sales in the name of anti-hoarding or market stability. That doesn't confiscate anything, but it changes behavior. It changes liquidity. It changes premiums. It changes who wants to transact. Imagine another measure.